It had been a day like any other, with freshly recycled air puffing in along the recreational tunnels, and workers ambling with family or friends on their days off. His own shift didn't start for a few cycles yet, so Commander Uvaskossi was savouring the faint sound of tinkling music. Humans had these things called wind chimes that had become popular despite there being no real wind. All in all, he was as close to unattentive as he ever became, even while off duty. Thus it was, with a deep and sudden flare of panic, that the commander became aware of a great commotion in the tunnel behind him, slicing into his peaceful reverie. Shrieking, high-pitched multiple voices, incoherent, was coming up one of the side tunnels, echoing back and forth across the space behind Uvaskossi. Barely managing to sidestep a lazily rolling trolley cart, selling some treat or trinket, he spun to the side and rotated his course to double back and see what was going on. A six-fingered paw dropped to his service weapon, but he hesitated. There were no borders, and he'd hate to tase any crew or civvy as the first action of resort. Then the tumult exploded outward, and the idea of tasing anyone left his mind completely. Children. It was children. About 20. No, 30? More were coming every moment, scrambling and falling out of the green, enamelled residential archway like a giant fire were blazing behind them. There wasn't, of course. No alerts, no environmentals, no beeps in his internet to give him a message. And certainly no telltale reek of smoke. Not an adult in sight was reacting to this. Most of the children were human children, which might have been part of the cause for that. Humans, even their offspring, were notoriously sturdy. Not because they were actually physically sturdy. They were decent, but not spectacular in that respect, galaxy-wide, but because they were clever, had fiddly little fingers for tool use and creation, and absolutely not a whit of fear left in their hindbrain to remind them not to do monumentally stupid things. And they were oddly good at dodging. That seemed the human blessing, above average at almost everything, except swimming, Yuva thought, briefly smug at the thought of their envy of his paw webbing, and prone to savant individuals in nearly every field and topic on the regular. In this case, however, it was not promising that it seemed to be human children leading the charge. A few others had joined them. There were a pair of feathered ones. Here came a rapidly scurrying reckonant, and was that a Fideli cub? But it was seeing one of his own species in the batch that made his brain attempt a hard reboot in the middle of the hallway. Oyosni weren't a fearful species either, but they were ill-prone to abandoning their little ones in times of crisis, and any passing adult should have been compellingly invested in seeing to the little one's well-being. Of course, he was the only adult Oyosni around, meaning that duty fell to him. The little one seemed on the older end of the crowd, nearing the beginning of adulthood, keeping up with the humans leading the charge. As the wave of screaming children overtook him, the commander turned one more time, to catch up with the front line, which was mostly older human children. Seeing a few of them carrying the smallest and slowest was heartwarming, but not the kind of encouraging he wanted to see. The little Oyosni he had spotted was exchanging high-pitched noises with the other children at high speed, but it was that weird, pig-ding Creole sort of hodgepodge the station's youngsters were putting together. What exactly was the difference between a Belter Lauder and a loyal Droog? And it was mostly nonsense to him. It was then that Yuva finally processed the tone of the half-hyped mob. Human children had expressive faces, but their little smiles looked so often like grimaces of pain or aggression that he was still getting used to the way the little ones grinned. Oddly, it was supposedly visible what gender humans were this young, but the commander had trouble figuring it out, and since almost no one else's juveniles were dimorphic like this, it was a human-specific issue. Other species were similarly difficult to read, none so much as the Raconids. Chitin didn't exactly telegraph emotions, but his own kind? Yuva was realizing that the child was laughing and screeching with excitement. In just another step or two, struggling through the surging pile of uncontrolled brats, he caught up with the little one. One big paw reached out and scooped the child right out of the fray. Not wanting to be trampled underfoot, Yuva had the wits to keep walking once he had acquired his target. Good gods, wasn't this his cousin's sister-in-law's adopted orphan? Kuziti, or Kuzishka, that was it. A sniff confirmed it. This close, he could identify the child by scent. There weren't that many of their species on board, and the ones who weren't part of his family group were refugees they had picked up around Proxima Nuage after the Choleraxibic disaster. This was indeed some distant little cousin of his. All the more reason to guarantee her safety, he mused, feet moving absently with the rush of them now that he had registered their excitement. It was a relief to let his own panic ebb, so his voice could carry authority and not fright. "Youngling," he barked, commanding Zichka's little dark eyes to meet his. "Explain the calamity!" Before the child could respond and interrupt Yuvakos's stray thoughts, the human littles all flung their arms forward like a battalion of grenadiers to point at something ahead of them. Yuva glanced up. Wasn't that the cart that had nearly ended him, with his chime making a jolly tune the whole time? Then he learned the joy of temporary deafness, as the children screamed their gleeful response in unison. "It's the ice cream truck!"